Hey everyone, I'm Sarah. And before I tell you this story, I need you to understand something about my family. We weren't rich growing up. My dad worked construction, my mom cleaned houses, and every dollar mattered. But we had something that money couldn't buy. We had Grandpa Joe, and we had each other. At least, I thought we did. My brother Marcus looked my 78-year-old grandfather dead in the eye and said, "Old people don't need that much space anyway, Grandpa Joe." What Marcus didn't know was that Grandpa had been recording every single conversation for weeks, and 3 days later, that recording landed my own brother in federal court, facing fraud charges worth over $1 million. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me introduce you to the people who matter in this story, because understanding who they are will help you understand how something this devastating could happen in a family that used to eat Sunday dinner together every single week. First, there's me, Sarah Chen. I'm 29, work as a marketing coordinator for a small company in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I'm raising my 6-year-old daughter, Emma, as a single mom. I'm not perfect, but I've always tried to do right by my family, especially Grandpa Joe. He's been my anchor since I was little, the one person who never judged me when I got pregnant young, never made me feel like a failure when Emma's dad walked out, and never once made me feel like I was asking for too much when I needed help. Then there's my brother, Marcus. He's 32, 3 years older than me, and he's what you'd call a smooth talker. Marcus became a real estate agent about 5 years ago, and he's good at making people believe he knows what he's talking about. He drives a leased BMW, wears expensive suits, and always has some new investment opportunity he's excited about. What most people don't know is that Marcus has been struggling financially for years. His marriage to his wife Jessica is falling apart. He's got gambling debts that keep growing, and his real estate business is barely keeping him afloat. But Marcus has always been good at hiding his problems behind that charming smile. And then there's the heart of this whole story. My grandfather, Joseph Chen, who everyone calls Grandpa Joe. He's 78 years old, a retired auto mechanic who worked for Ford for 35 years before they shut down the plant. Grandpa Joe is the kind of man who fixes his own roof, grows his own vegetables, and has never asked anyone for anything he couldn't earn himself. 2 years ago, he lost my grandmother Margaret after 52 years of marriage, and it nearly broke him. But he's tougher than he looks, sharper than people give him credit for, and more loyal to family than anyone deserves. Here's what makes this story so important. Grandpa Joe owns a piece of property that's worth $1.4 million. It's a beautiful lakefront home in northern Michigan that he and Grandma Margaret built together back in 1985 when the land was cheap and the lake was just starting to attract developers. They paid $35,000 for 5 acres of pristine lakefront, and over the years, they turned it into something magical. Grandpa Joe built that house with his own hands, board by board, while working full-time at the plant. Grandma Margaret planted every flower, chose every color, and made it a home where our entire family gathered for holidays, birthdays, and just because. Now, with all the development around the lake, that property is worth more money than any of us ever imagined our family would have. But here's the thing. It was never about the money for Grandpa Joe. That house represents 40 years of memories, love, and the life he built with the woman he adored. Every corner holds a story. Every room holds a piece of their history together. What you need to understand is that this isn't just a story about money or property. This is about what happens when greed turns family members into strangers, when desperation makes someone willing to destroy the person who loved them most, and how sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones capable of hurting us the deepest. Over the next few months, I watched my brother systematically manipulate, lie to, and emotionally abuse our grandfather in ways that still make me sick to think about. But I also got to witness something incredible. I got to see a 78-year-old man who everybody underestimated show them exactly why you should never count out someone who's survived 8 decades of life. So buckle up, because this story has everything: family betrayal, legal drama, secret recordings, and a plot twist that nobody saw coming, including Marcus. Let me paint you a picture of what our family looked like before everything fell apart, because you need to understand how perfect our little world seemed from the outside. Every Sunday for the past 6 years, Emma and I would drive the 45 minutes north to Grandpa Joe's house for dinner. It became our sacred ritual after Grandma Margaret passed away. Emma would run up those wooden steps that Grandpa Joe built himself, throw open that screen door, and yell, "Grandpa Joe, we're here!" And without fail, he'd be waiting in the kitchen with her favorite chocolate chip pancakes, even though it was dinner time because that's just who he was. The house itself is something out of a magazine. Picture this: 5 acres of pristine lakefront property with a 2-story log home that looks like it belongs on a postcard. There's a wraparound porch with handmade rocking chairs where Grandpa Joe and Grandma Margaret used to watch the sunset every evening for decades. The inside is all warm wood and stone with a massive stone fireplace that Grandpa Joe built by hand, carrying every single rock up from the shoreline. Family photos cover every surface. Our graduations, Emma's first steps, holiday gatherings where the whole extended family would cram into that living room, and somehow it never felt crowded. But here's what made those Sunday dinners special. It wasn't just about the food or the beautiful setting. Grandpa Joe was still completely himself, sharp as a tack, telling stories about his days at the Ford plant, teaching Emma how to bait a hook, fixing whatever needed fixing around the house. People always assume that when someone hits their late 70s, they start declining rapidly. But Grandpa Joe was proof that age is just a number when you've got purpose and people who love you. The only signs that he was struggling came in small moments that broke my heart. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at Grandma Margaret's chair at the dinner table, and I knew he was fighting back tears. He'd started talking to her pictures when he thought nobody was listening, updating her on family news like she was still there. The house felt too big for just him, too quiet, but every time I gently suggested maybe having someone come by during the week to check on him, he'd get this stubborn look and say, "Sarah, honey, I've been taking care of myself longer than you've been alive. I'm not ready to be taken care of yet." What I didn't realize at the time was that Grandpa Joe was getting a very different kind of attention from Marcus. While I was bringing casseroles and helping with yard work, Marcus had started showing up during the week with what he called business visits. At first, Grandpa Joe mentioned it casually. Marcus would stop by with coffee and they'd sit on the porch talking about practical things. I thought it was sweet that Marcus was finally stepping up and spending time with family, but over the past few months, something had started to change in Grandpa Joe's demeanor. He seemed more anxious during our Sunday visits, distracted in a way that wasn't like him. He'd mentioned that Marcus had been bringing important people to meet him: financial advisors, insurance agents, people who kept talking about planning for the future and making smart decisions while he still could. The first red flag came when Grandpa Joe asked me, completely out of nowhere, "Sarah, do you think I'm becoming a burden on the family?" I was so shocked I nearly dropped the plate I was washing. This was the man who had helped me through every crisis in my adult life, who babysat Emma whenever I needed him to, who had never asked for anything from anyone. "Grandpa Joe, where is this coming from?" I asked him, turning around to see genuine worry in his eyes. He looked down at his hands and said, "Marcus keeps saying that maintaining this place is getting too expensive, that I'm not thinking clearly about what's practical at my age. He says the family is worried about me living alone out here, that maybe it's time to consider other options." That conversation should have been my wake-up call, but I was juggling 2 jobs and raising Emma, and I trusted Marcus. I thought he was actually looking out for Grandpa Joe's best interests. I had no idea that those practical conversations were actually the beginning of an elaborate psychological manipulation designed to steal everything Grandpa Joe had worked his entire life to build. Looking back now, I can see that Grandpa Joe was trying to warn me without directly accusing his own grandson of having ulterior motives. He loved Marcus, trusted him, but something in his gut was telling him that these conversations didn't feel right. The problem was nobody else was there to witness what was really happening during those weekday visits. The first time I truly understood something was wrong happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I had gotten off work early and decided to surprise Grandpa Joe with a visit. As I pulled into his driveway, I saw Marcus's BMW parked there along with a black sedan I didn't recognize. Through the living room window, I could see 3 men in suits sitting around Grandpa Joe's coffee table, papers spread everywhere. I walked up to the front door and knocked. but nobody answered even though I could hear voices inside. So I used my key, the one Grandpa Joe had given me years ago for emergencies. The moment I stepped inside, the conversation stopped dead. "Sarah!" Marcus jumped up from the couch, and I could see panic flash across his face. "What are you doing here?" "I came to visit Grandpa Joe. What's going on?" I looked at the two strangers, both middle-aged men in expensive suits who seemed uncomfortable with my arrival. One of them, a guy with slicked-back hair and a briefcase, stood up and extended his hand. "You must be Sarah. I'm David Walsh from Premier Financial Services. We're just helping your grandfather explore some options for his future financial security." Grandpa Joe looked smaller than usual, hunched in his favorite armchair with papers scattered on the side table next to him. His face was pale, and he kept glancing between Marcus and these strangers like he was looking for permission to speak. "What kind of options?" I asked, moving closer to Grandpa Joe. Marcus stepped between us. "Sarah, this doesn't concern you. We're handling some complicated financial planning that requires professional expertise." "Anything involving Grandpa Joe concerns me," I said, my voice getting sharper. "Grandpa, are you okay with all this?" Before he could answer, the second stranger, a younger guy with a clipboard, jumped in. "Ms. Chen, your grandfather's property has significant tax implications and maintenance costs that could become burdensome as he ages. We're simply presenting options that could provide him with more liquid assets and less responsibility." I felt my stomach drop. "You're talking about selling his house?" "Not selling," Marcus said quickly. "Transferring ownership to family members who can better manage the financial complexities while ensuring Grandpa Joe has everything he needs." "What does that mean exactly?" I was looking directly at Grandpa Joe now, but Marcus kept talking. "It means," Marcus said, his voice taking on that smooth, condescending tone he used when he thought he was the smartest person in the room, "that we transfer the property into a trust managed by someone with real estate experience, namely me. And Grandpa Joe gets to live here without worrying about taxes, maintenance, or any of the headaches that come with property ownership. And what do you get out of it, Marcus?" The question hung in the air for a moment. David Walsh shuffled his papers and cleared his throat. "Well, there would be certain management fees and—" "I asked Marcus, not you," I interrupted. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I get the satisfaction of knowing our grandfather is taken care of and our family's assets are protected. Unlike some people, I actually think about the long-term implications of these situations." That's when Grandpa Joe finally spoke up, his voice quieter than usual. "Sarah, honey, they've been explaining that the property taxes are going to go up significantly next year, and that the house needs a new roof, new plumbing, all kinds of expensive repairs that I might not be able to afford." I looked around that beautiful living room. Everything looked perfect to me. "Grandpa Joe, when's the last time you had any issues with the plumbing?" He looked confused. "Well, Marcus said the inspection showed—" "What inspection?" I turned to Marcus. "Who authorized an inspection of Grandpa Joe's house?" "Sarah, you're being paranoid," Marcus said. "We're trying to help him make informed decisions based on professional assessments." "Show me the inspection report." David Walsh suddenly became very interested in organizing his briefcase. "Well, that documentation is back at our office, but I can assure you—" "So you don't have it with you?" I was getting angry now. "You're pressuring a 78-year-old man to make major financial decisions based on reports you don't even have copies of." Marcus stood up abruptly. "Okay, I think we need to table this discussion. Grandpa Joe, why don't you think about everything we've talked about, and we'll come back tomorrow to answer any other questions." As they gathered their papers, I heard Marcus whisper to David Walsh, "This is exactly what I was worried about. She's going to make this complicated." After they left, Grandpa Joe and I sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Sarah, I built this house with my own hands. Your grandmother picked out every tile in that kitchen. But Marcus keeps saying I'm being selfish, that I'm not thinking about what's best for the family. He says you and your parents agree that I should consider other living arrangements, but you're too polite to say it directly." That's when I realized the full scope of what was happening. Marcus wasn't just trying to manipulate Grandpa Joe. He was lying about our entire family's feelings and using our grandfather's love for us as a weapon against him. After Marcus and his fake advisors left that day, I stayed with Grandpa Joe for hours. We sat on his porch watching the sun set over the lake, and I watched him wrestle with emotions I'd never seen him struggle with before. Doubt, fear, and something that broke my heart even more. Shame. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "I feel like I'm losing my mind." For weeks, Marcus has been telling me things that don't feel right, but then he brings these official-looking people with their fancy briefcases and complicated explanations, and I start thinking, maybe I really am just a confused old man who doesn't understand modern finances. I took his weathered hand in mine. "Grandpa Joe, you're the smartest person I know. If something doesn't feel right, it's because it isn't right." That's when he told me something that changed everything. "Your grandmother used to have a saying," he said, his eyes getting that distant look they got whenever he thought about her. She'd say, "Joe, trust but verify. People can fool you with words, but actions and evidence don't lie." She was suspicious of everyone, salesmen, mechanics, even preachers, but she was never wrong about people's intentions. He stood up slowly and motioned for me to follow him inside. We walked to his bedroom and he opened the drawer of his nightstand. Inside was an old digital voice recorder that looked like it was from the early 2000s. "I found this in Margaret's craft room last week when I was going through her things," he said, holding it up. "She used to record her book club discussions so she could remember the good parts later. It still works perfectly." I looked at him, not understanding where this was going. "Sarah, what if I'm not just a paranoid old man? What if Margaret's instincts are still looking out for me, even now?" His eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in weeks. "What if I start recording these conversations with Marcus and his friends? That way, I'll have evidence of exactly what they're saying, and I can figure out if they're trying to help me or take advantage of me." The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. "Grandpa Joe, that's actually genius. But are you sure you want to do this? I mean, Marcus is family." His face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "Sarah, family doesn't lie to family. Family doesn't make you feel stupid or scared in your own home. If Marcus is really trying to help me, then he won't mind being recorded. But if he's trying to trick me..." He trailed off, but I could see the determination building in his eyes. Over the next hour, we worked out a plan. Grandpa Joe would start carrying the recorder in his shirt pocket whenever Marcus visited. The device was small enough to be completely hidden, and since Grandpa Joe always wore button-up shirts, the pocket placement would capture conversations clearly without being detectable. "But what if they search you or something?" I asked, suddenly worried about putting him in danger. Grandpa Joe actually chuckled. "Sarah, honey, I'm 78 years old. People stop seeing you as a threat when you hit my age. They think you're just a harmless old man who doesn't understand what's happening around him. That's going to be their biggest mistake." We tested the recorder several times, and the audio quality was surprisingly good. Grandpa Joe practiced casually reaching into his pocket to start recording without being obvious about it. For a man who still used a flip phone, he was remarkably good with the technology. "There's something else," he said as we finished our practice session. "Marcus called me this morning and said he's bringing someone very important next week. A notary and some lawyer who specializes in senior financial transitions. He says it's time to finalize the arrangements and that I shouldn't wait any longer to secure my future." My stomach dropped. "That sounds like they're planning to pressure you into signing something major." "Exactly. Which means we need to be ready." He held up the recorder with a confidence I hadn't seen from him in months. "Margaret always said that bullies count on their victims staying quiet and isolated. Well, I'm not going to be quiet anymore, and thanks to this little device, I'm not going to be the only witness to what they're really saying." That night, as I drove home, I realized that Grandpa Joe wasn't the victim everyone thought he was. He was a strategist, a fighter, and he was about to turn the tables on people who had seriously underestimated him. Marcus thought he was manipulating a confused old man, but he was actually walking into a trap set by someone with 8 decades of life experience and nothing left to lose. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The day Marcus planned to finalize everything was a Thursday in late March. I had taken the day off work and was parked down the road from Grandpa Joe's house, my heart pounding as I waited for his call. We had spent the previous week collecting evidence. 3 separate recordings where Marcus made increasingly desperate and aggressive statements, each one more damning than the last, but nothing prepared us for what happened that Thursday. Marcus arrived at 10 a.m. sharp with 3 people. The same fake financial advisor, David Walsh, a woman who introduced herself as a certified notary, and a man in an expensive suit who claimed to be an estate planning attorney. Grandpa Joe later told me that the attorney's business card looked legitimate, but something about the way he avoided eye contact made him suspicious. Grandpa Joe had the recorder running before they even sat down. The conversation started with what sounded like friendly small talk, but quickly turned into a full court press. David Walsh spread documents across the coffee table and started talking about time-sensitive opportunities and estate tax implications that required immediate action. "Mr. Chen," the supposed attorney said, "your grandson Marcus has explained the family's concerns about your living situation. While we certainly respect your independence, the reality is that property of this value comes with legal and financial complexities that could put your entire estate at risk if not properly managed." Then Marcus took over, and his tone was different from anything Grandpa Joe had heard before, sharper, more impatient, almost threatening. "Grandpa Joe, we've been patient, but we can't wait any longer. The property taxes are going up 40% next year. The house needs $50,000 in immediate repairs, and frankly, you're not getting any younger. What happens if you fall down those stairs and break a hip? What happens if you have a stroke out here and nobody finds you for days?" "Marcus," Grandpa Joe said slowly, "these numbers don't match what my accountant told me about the property taxes." "Your accountant?" Marcus laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. "Grandpa, no offense, but you've been using the same guy for 20 years. He's probably as out of touch as you are with modern real estate valuations." That's when the attorney jumped in with what sounded like legal threats. "Mr. Chen, if something happens to you while you're living alone in a property this size, and it comes out that your family tried to help you make safer arrangements but you refused, there could be liability issues. Your grandson could face legal consequences for not protecting you from your own poor judgment." The recording captured Grandpa Joe's voice getting smaller as he asked, "What do you mean, legal consequences?" Marcus's response was the most chilling thing I've ever heard. "It means, Grandpa, that if you're too stubborn to accept help and something bad happens to you, I could get blamed for not stepping in. Sarah could lose custody of Emma because the courts might decide our family is negligent with vulnerable family members. Is that what you want? Do you want Emma to suffer because you're too proud to admit you need help?" The silence on the recording lasted for almost 30 seconds. Then Grandpa Joe's voice, barely audible, "You would really use Emma against me?" "I'm not using anyone," Marcus snapped. "I'm explaining reality. Sign the papers, move to a nice assisted living facility where you'll be safe and taken care of, and everyone wins. Or keep being selfish and watch your stubbornness destroy this family." That's when Marcus said the words that would ultimately destroy him. "Look, Grandpa, I'm sorry if this sounds harsh, but old people don't need that much space anyway. You're rattling around in a house meant for a family. Let someone who can actually use it properly take over the responsibility." The notary, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation's tone, tried to redirect. "Perhaps we should review the documents one more time?" "No," Marcus cut her off. "We're done reviewing. Grandpa Joe, you're signing today, or I'm calling Adult Protective Services tomorrow and telling them you're not competent to live alone anymore. Your choice." The recording captured the sound of papers rustling, a pen clicking, and then Grandpa Joe's voice, stronger than it had been all morning. "You know what, Marcus? I think I need to call my granddaughter Sarah before I sign anything this important." "Absolutely not," Marcus said immediately. "Sarah doesn't need to be involved in this. She's already dealing with enough." "Actually," Grandpa Joe said, and I could hear the smile in his voice even through the recorder, "I think she does need to be involved. In fact, I think a lot of people need to be involved in this conversation." That's when Grandpa Joe called me and I called the police, and Marcus's entire world came crashing down in the span of 20 minutes. When I walked into Grandpa Joe's house that Thursday afternoon with Detective Martinez and elder abuse attorney Rebecca Sullivan, the look on Marcus's face was something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Pure shock, followed by panic, followed by the desperate scramble of someone who knew they'd been caught red-handed. "What's going on here?" Marcus demanded, jumping up from the couch. The notary and fake attorney were already gathering their papers, clearly wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. Detective Martinez held up his badge. "We need to speak with everyone present regarding allegations of elder financial abuse and fraud." "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, but his voice was shaking. "We're just helping my grandfather with some financial planning." That's when Attorney Sullivan pulled out a small speaker and pressed play. Marcus's own voice filled the room. "Old people don't need that much space anyway. You're rattling around in a house meant for a family." The color drained from Marcus's face. "That's taken out of context." "Really?" Sullivan pressed play again. This time it was Marcus threatening to call Adult Protective Services and claiming Sarah could lose custody of Emma. Then the threats about legal consequences. Then the lies about property taxes and repair costs. 4 hours of recordings. 4 hours of systematic psychological abuse, manipulation, and attempted fraud, all in Marcus's own voice. David Walsh, the fake financial advisor, was the first to crack. Turns out he wasn't licensed for anything. He was just a friend of Marcus's who owed him money and agreed to play a role in exchange for debt forgiveness. The estate planning attorney was actually a guy who had been disbarred 3 years earlier for similar schemes. Only the notary was legitimate, and she was horrified when she realized she'd been brought in to notarize fraudulent documents. The legal consequences came swift and severe. Marcus was arrested that day and charged with elder abuse, attempted fraud, conspiracy, and forgery. The fake documents he'd created, including property tax assessments and repair estimates, constituted additional fraud charges. His real estate license was suspended immediately, and the state began investigating other transactions he'd handled. But here's what really hit me. During the investigation, we discovered that Marcus had been planning this for over a year. He'd researched Grandpa Joe's property value, looked into the legal requirements for power of attorney transfers, and even practiced his manipulation tactics on other elderly clients. This wasn't a desperate spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a calculated long-term plan to steal from his own grandfather. 6 months later, Marcus took a plea deal. 2 years in state prison, 5 years probation, $75,000 in restitution and legal fees, and a permanent restraining order preventing any contact with Grandpa Joe. He also had to surrender his real estate license permanently and register as someone who committed crimes against vulnerable adults. The fake advisors faced their own consequences. David Walsh got 18 months for fraud and conspiracy. The disbarred attorney was sentenced to 3 years because this wasn't his first offense involving elder abuse. But the real victory wasn't the legal justice. It was watching Grandpa Joe reclaim his confidence and dignity. The man who had seemed so small and uncertain during those manipulation sessions transformed back into the sharp, strong person I'd always known him to be. He used the experience to become an advocate for other seniors. Grandpa Joe now speaks at community centers and senior living facilities about recognizing financial abuse. He always brings that little digital recorder with him and tells people, sometimes the best defense against a predator is evidence they don't know you're collecting. He also worked with Attorney Sullivan to create a proper estate plan, a real one, with legitimate lawyers and transparent terms. The property will stay in our family, with provisions for his care if he ever needs it, and protections against any future manipulation attempts. As for our family, we're slowly healing. My parents flew in from Arizona when they heard what happened, and they've committed to visiting more regularly. We're rebuilding our Sunday dinners, but now they're different. Stronger, more intentional, more grateful. Emma, who's now 7, doesn't fully understand what happened, but she knows that bad people tried to trick Great-Grandpa Joe, but he was too smart for them. Last Sunday, she asked Grandpa Joe to teach her how to use the voice recorder, just in case any bad people try to trick me too. The most important lesson I learned is this: elder abuse often comes from within the family, and it often targets the people who are the most generous and trusting. But it also taught me that age doesn't make someone powerless. Sometimes experience and wisdom are the greatest weapons against people who underestimate their victims. Grandpa Joe saved himself, protected our family, and proved that you should never count out someone who's survived 78 years of life. Some people see old age as weakness, but Marcus learned the hard way that it can also be the ultimate source of strength. If this story taught you anything, I hope it's this. Trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right, especially when it involves elderly family members. The warning signs are often subtle at first: increased isolation, sudden changes in financial arrangements, or family members who seem unusually interested in property or assets. Don't ignore those red flags. If you suspect someone you love is being financially abused, document everything, seek legal advice immediately, and remember that elder abuse is a crime with serious consequences. Resources like the National Center on Elder Abuse and your local adult protective services can provide guidance and support. Grandpa Joe's story proves that it's never too late to fight back against people who try to take advantage of you. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against a predator is simply refusing to be silent. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your share could help protect another family from going through what we experienced. Drop a comment below if you've dealt with similar situations. I read every single one, and your experiences might help other viewers recognize warning signs in their own families. And if you want to hear more stories about family drama, justice served, and people who refuse to be victims, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for listening to our story, and remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is also the strongest. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise.